Well, we turn now to a new report on the death toll from Hurricane Maria. Puerto Rican officials now say it's actually the deadliest storm for Americans in more than a century. Well, the independent report from George Washington University was commissioned by Puerto Rican officials. It concludes that nearly 3,000 people died as a result of the hurricane. That's actually more than Katrina. It also stands in stark contrast to the government's initial estimate that dozens of Americans have been killed. David Begnaud broke this story for us, and he's live from San Juan, where he just interviewed Puerto Rico's governor. David, what can you tell us? What did the governor have to say about these numbers?
Rena, we are inside of the governor's mansion, the Fortaleza, here in San Juan, and I can tell you from just speaking to the governor a short time ago that he accepts the findings of this study. He accepts the number as deemed and reported by George Washington University. And here's what he told me he is about to do. As of this afternoon, within the next hour and a half, he will announce that he will be signing an executive order within the next 24 hours. That executive order will create a commission made up of as many as 8 members, some of whom are members of his government, others of whom will be experts in the field of disaster management and mortality data. The governor specifically told me that he wants to implement the findings from the report that George Washington has recommended as things that the government should do. And let me tell you, there are a lot of recommendations. I've read every word in the report, and there are a lot of things that the university says the government can and should do. The governor says he expects to do it, and he's ready to start right away.
David, that's significant, the fact that the government is now saying they acknowledge the report, they accept it, and they will follow these findings. That is just big. But I do want to ask you, is there anything that Puerto Rico feels that this White House could do that could help with this situation on the ground?
The White House, you're talking about in Washington,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Whether they can help? You know, look, it's interesting you asked that, because I asked the governor, is there any blame that the federal government shares, FEMA or the White House? And I got to tell you, he is consistent when you ask him that question. He does not point fingers. And so he said, listen, David, there's a lot of blame to go around. As the governor of Puerto Rico, I accept the majority of the blame because I'm the man in a position of power. But Rena, let's make it very clear. This government was woefully unprepared for this storm. This administration had only been in office here on the island for about 8 months, but the plan that was in place to respond to a hurricane was a plan that was good enough for only a Category 1. And what happened? There was no power, no transportation, no water, no cell phone service, no landline service, not even the ability to call 911. And if you could flag down someone for help, chances are the ambulance couldn't even get to you. And the people who drove the ambulance probably couldn't even get from their house to the ambulance. Everything on this island was incapacitated. And I'm telling you that from personal experience, from being here to cover it. So when it comes to blame, listen, people are going to be hurt. But I got the sense, Rena, from talking to the governor, he was hurt. That the number made him sad. That's the sense that I got from him, is that his voice was lowered. He sounded somewhat reflective, and he used the term of, I'm saddened by this number. Because again, the government has for so long said, no, don't jump to conclusions with the Harvard study. No, don't jump to conclusions with that study. Let George Washington come out. Well, now it's out. And the number is higher it's higher than anyone in the government expected.
David, can you give us a sense, though, initially, the initial projection of the death toll was 64. How do they make that initial 64 projection, and how do you get from 64 to 2,975?
So good question. And let me be as clear-cut as I possibly can. 64 was the death toll that they got when they looked at people who died in deaths directly related. So in other words, a landslide or a tree fell on them, right? That's a direct death. So 64 is what they got to with direct deaths. But Rena, there were so many other people who died because they couldn't get dialysis, or they ran out of oxygen, or they went to the hospital and the hospital turned them away, right? Those are indirect deaths. So here's what George Washington did. They took census data from 2010 to 2017, and they looked at how many people had died during that time period, and they projected what the deaths would be for the same time period in 2017 after the hurricane. And what they found was that the number was far higher than it should have been. 2,000, that's where we get the more than 2,900, right? And that's where they got the number of deaths. And the only thing that could have added to that, the only thing that was different during that time period was a storm called Maria. So listen, one of the things that sticks out to me, Rena, from the report is that physicians on the island admitted to investigators from the university that they didn't even have the proper training in knowing what to do and how to classify the deaths. So they were being asked to classify a death as storm-related, and some said, I didn't classify it because I was worried about getting sued if I was wrong, but I also didn't have any training on exactly how to figure out whether that death was hurricane-related or maybe wasn't. That was the distinction. It was a lack of training. And by the way, in all fairness, the university says that's the case really on the mainland too. Doctors don't have a lot of training when it comes to declaring that death was attributable to the disaster.
Something you just don't think about often when you're talking about death toll after a major disaster. Our David Begnaud on the ground with exclusive reporting in Puerto Rico on Hurricane Maria. David, grateful for your reporting. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rena.